Thank you for joining us on the eve of Mobility Week as we unveil our first zero-emission, all-electric bus to go into Lynx operations. Mobility Week is a statewide celebration of promoting safer, more efficient transportation choices and an ideal time to think about how we can improve multimodal options to reduce traffic congestion and benefit the environment and improve public health. Exciting to cut the ribbon on Station 9, serving the Rosemont neighborhood. And along with being the home of some of the very best firefighters Orlando has to offer and having some of the best equipment, Station 9 was also built with firefighters' health and safety first and foremost. So the station was designed to promote diversity and inclusion in the workplace and includes private individual crew bunk rooms, showers and restrooms, and a secure room for special uses such as nursing.
Trailing thoughts from Shingo.
That again, good morning and welcome to the August 23rd meeting of the Orlando City Council. Today's workshop is going to be focused on Community Trust and Equity Initiative update. And over the last year, we've taken a number of steps to strengthen our efforts to address racial inequality in our community. And last year, we did a lot of listening. We heard calls for change from residents, but we also took immediate action. We expanded our youth groups and we strengthened our Opd's Use of Force policies in an effort to make sure that every resident in Orlando feels equally valued, equally protected, and has a fair and real opportunity to thrive. One of those efforts was also to launch the Community Trust and Equity Initiative to further our community policing and achieve real meaningful reform. In this initiative, we engaged a third-party expert, the Bowman Group, to do an in-depth analysis of our police department. We pretty much told them, you have free reign, you can open the hood and find whatever is going to be there, no holds barred. They spent the last year looking at our policies, to training, to operational practices, accountability systems, technology, equipment, data tracking, everything that you can think of involved with OPD. And we'll hear from Dr. Theron Bowman and Police Chief Lisa Womack, who's part of his team, as they outline their findings from this comprehensive review and their recommendations. So I want to acknowledge that this type of review isn't possible without the commitment of the men and women of our police department. The Bowman Group spent more than 5,000 hours with hundreds of our police officers from the top chief down through the ranks so they could get a thorough and complete understanding of our organization. So I want to thank Chief Roland and all of his police officers for dedicating their time and expertise on this work. And following Dr. Bowman's presentation, we'll hear from the chief. The court is yours.
Good morning, Mayor and Commissioners. It's an honor being here with you today. And as you've already indicated, we're on the end of a very good project. We believe what you have done here, Mayor, and the Police Chief Alon, bringing us in proactively is different from what most police departments and cities in the U.S. have done. So you've taken a giant step, if not a leap, in bringing us in, opening the doors of the police department, letting us in, giving us full unfettered access to the personnel, to the systems, to the records, to really assess against national best practices the police department and opportunities for improvement. So if I may, I'd like to take just a few minutes today to provide an overall summary of the work that we've done. And I will bring Chief Womack up to the microphone to give a little bit more detail about the 16 different areas we really look closely at. At the same time, we have a number of people online, who may be called upon to respond to questions. I won't name them individually right now, but if we call one of our virtual people online to respond to questions, we'll introduce them at that time. So here with this initiative, this is the list of people who are the primaries on this project. We have with all of our personnel, our attorneys, with our police practices specialists, with our behavioral health specialists and other people invested more than 3,900 hours into this project to bring you this product today. When we started working with the city of Orlando and Chief Alon in this police department, we agreed that the principal objective of this assessment is to identify opportunities to improve the police department and what it does, to look at their policies and practices, as well as their training and procedures. And really what it boils down to is finding ways to help an already very good police department improve. improve in terms of how it rates against national standards and best practices, and how it rates in terms of community perceptions, community desires, and community beliefs. So now that this part of our work is finishing up, we believe it's critically important that we don't stop here, but that the police department and the city now come together, conduct some strategic planning, determine an implementation strategy and schedule, because there will be some investments required in some instances. In some instances, there will be additional time required. And so this effort is needed to determine what those resource investments will be, when they should come forth, and how long it should take in order to bring them to the forefront. So when we look at the specific assessment objectives, our group, the Bowman Group, as well as the city, agreed, as the mayor have already indicated, that we wanted to do 5 things in particular, and then many other things underneath. So as the slide here shows, we wanted to really focus on improving department accountability through the change, accountability in the department, but also accountability to the residents and the community members. We wanted to make sure that we looked at oversight systems and processes and procedures, looked at use of force and internal affairs, community policing, engagement, stops, searches, and arrests, as well as behavioral health and early intervention systems within the police department. So in conducting our work, we looked internally at the department, we looked at internal affairs, we looked at policies, procedures, we looked at how the department relates to complainants, how they relate to citizens and community members that they're serving, how they are training their officers, and how that training relates to the policies as well. We believe in looking at the department that there is a huge opportunity to institute a community policing strategy that will improve community engagement, but also will help orient all of the officers, the work, and the work product in the OPD towards community policing. And then finally, the 5th of our assessment objectives is to determine the current status of the department in terms of those operations, in terms of the department policies. How do they measure, again, against best practices, and whether or not there are opportunities to actually improve all of the above. So what did we do in bringing in our panel of national experts? Well, this slide here shows our assessment approach. We, over the last almost a year now, we have engaged in rigorous document reviews. We've looked at policies, we've looked at training materials, we've actually sat in on OPD training courses, and so we've actually physically witnessed the interaction in the classroom. We've had an opportunity to interview multiple OPD personnel, as well as community members and other stakeholders, business members in the community. We've interviewed those personnel, and we've obtained multiple viewpoints from a wide spectrum of community members here from various areas of the city of Orlando. We've engaged in ride-alongs with police officers. We've looked at officers directly interacting with community members, and we've analyzed and reviewed the data and documents that have been provided. In some cases, we were able to fully analyze documents, and as you'll hear a little bit later, there are some opportunities to engage in better analyses with better data, better technology, in order to understand exactly what's going on. So in weighing the documents and in weighing the information that we've been able to review, we believe that there are 5 very important findings that require immediate attention of the OPD. Now, my caveat here is that these 5 findings would probably be true and needed in most police departments in the U.S., but certainly in wanting to be more attentive to community trust and equity issues in Orlando, the police department and the city needs to really pay attention to these 5 things: to thoroughly review and update all policies, department-wide across every area of the department, weighing those policies again against best practices in procedural justice. And procedural justice, you'll hear that word a lot, or that term a lot. It really means just giving people a say, treating them with dignity and respect. When officers interact with members of the community, those members of the community should feel listened to. They should feel like they've been heard. They should feel like they've been treated with respect. But we also recognize that if we want police officers to treat community members with dignity and respect, they themselves need to have that same experience within the police department. And so when we talk about procedural justice, we believe that that should be applied internally as well as externally at every interface where there are interactions and relationships between the cops and the supervisors, the cops and each other, but as well as the members of the community and the police. We believe that they should review impartial policing practices, community policing practices, as well as de-escalation. De-escalation, you'll see and hear that word a lot as well. And de-escalation simply means to approach every encounter with the opportunities to lessen force instead of increase force. The father of modern policing, Sir Robert Peel, in 1829, actually talked about this de-escalation. He didn't call it de-escalation, but what he said was, to the extent we gain voluntary compliance, lessens proportionately the need to use force. And so to the extent that the officers can engage in efforts and conduct which result in voluntary compliance, procedural justice is one of those, then that lessens the need to use force. That makes the community members safer, but that also makes our police officers and the police force safer in doing their job as well. We believe that it's important for the OPD to really strengthen their accountability systems, including making the use of force review process more robust, clarifying internal affairs practices, and also using the Citizen Police Review Board more efficiently and effectively as a sounding board to gather ideas as a part of the transparency process interacting with the community. The OPD needs to increase the data collection and analysis across all areas department-wide. If we want to change behavior, we have to understand what's happening. And in many cases, it's very difficult to understand what's actually happening in terms of the profile of the people who are being stopped, searched, and arrested, because the data just isn't there. And in some cases, the data isn't there because it hasn't been captured. In other cases, it's not there because the technology doesn't allow the kind of data capture that needs to happen. But we believe it's important for the OPD to increase the data collection and analysis across the entire department, to develop a department-wide community policing philosophy. And the words department-wide are really important because many agencies, including the OPD, really relies on a small number of people to do most of the community policing work. When we understand community policing as a philosophy, and as a philosophy, we advocate that every police officer, every police individual, every police personnel will understand their role and embrace and engage this philosophy so that every interaction with a member of the community has that community policing feel. It has that feel that the person is being listened to and treated with dignity and respect. And finally, to strengthen the community policing expectations and the collateral training across the department. So we didn't want to look inside at the core of the department and say that this is a department that's riddled with problems, because it has issues like every other police department does in the country, but OPD has some really significant strengths. And OPD does some things very well as well. And so we wanted to make sure that you understood and that OPD understands that we see some of the good things the department is doing as well. And so these strengths include community perceptions of OPD's community engagement, as well as the community's perception of community policing have improved in recent years, especially under this chief right here. They recognize that something different is happening. Even today, they recognize that the chief is putting forth a special effort to interact with the community, that the Public Information Office has managed to grow its social media footprint and strengthen this relationship with the local media. Communication is really important, and we see that that's happening with the PIO. OPD has laid a foundation for using analytics to drive decision-making, and it's important that they invest more in these analytics to drive this decision-making and support open data engagement with the community. So we recognize that there's a portal open right now to the public that the public can actually access and create visualizations. That's modern, that's different, that's new, and we very much advocate that approach. The OPD has created and implemented a robust crime center that internal affairs leadership, like many other areas of the OPD, the leadership and personnel are hardworking. They're supportive of each other, and they also are open to recommendations for improvement. We went in, they asked us, what can we do to make ourselves and our processes better? What can we do? Tell us how we can create that relationship with the community members. We see that OPD has a solid foundation for an early intervention system and program and policy. This early intervention policy is designed and program is designed to help officers not become overwhelmed with the stresses of the job and to take it out on residents or community, to help officers and the department understand when it's time for officers to receive a break, or what the department can do to better support the officers and their needs so that they can continue to provide a high level of service to the community. We want officers that are working efficiently, but we want them to be properly equipped. And OPD has laid this foundation already for a solid early intervention program. The City of Orlando and the OPD are partnering with community mental health member Aspire, and we commend OPD and the city for this proactive partnership in creating alternative models of responses to people who are in behavioral crisis. If you look at the research across the country, fully 50 to 70% of the police interactions with people who ultimately are subjects of violent force or officer-involved shootings or homicides typically has a mental health or behavioral health nexus. And so having this program and this initiative is critically important to improving the safety of your community. The school resource section operates within best practices in school-based policing, and Chief Womack will talk a little bit more about that. But OPD has also created a community youth outreach coordinator position who coordinates a number of programs for youth of Orlando. We also note that OPD partners with school and community organizations for youth-related activities, and there are multiple opportunities in this arena. We found that FPR, for example, is a great resource for interacting with and engaging with the youth of the community in particular. We recognize that everything in the community that causes crime to increase is not necessarily the domain of the police. That in some cases, engaging FPR will proactively help avoid a problem 2 to 3 years down the road. In other cases, engaging the library and librarians will do the same. So the point here is that we recognize that OPD has already taken steps to engage some entities outside of the department. It's critically important that more of that happens, as we'll discuss in our recommendations. So we, in our report, boiled this 9-10 months of work down to what we call 16 key recommendation goals. And I've given you a 50,000-foot overview of these goals, and Chief Womack will come back and talk a little bit more specifically about these key recommendation goals, some of the findings, and also some of the recommendations. There are 216 recommendations total. We obviously will not go through all of those today. They are included in the report. But we believe that these 16 overarching key recommendation goals are the waypoints to moving the department from good to great. And we believe that if the requisite strategic planning, the interaction with the community, the efforts internally and externally will move forward, we believe that this department will be a leader, not just in Florida, but in the United States of America. So just very briefly, these key recommendation goals: embrace community policing as a department-wide philosophy. Department-wide philosophy. Ensure that the force that is used is only that which is objectively reasonable, necessary, and proportional to the threat. So, Dr. Bowman, what are you saying? That's saying that every time an officer uses force, but then every time a supervisor evaluates the use of force, every time the chain of command evaluates the use of force, that question should be asked: is it objectively reasonable? Is it necessary? And is it proportional to the threat? Because if it's not, then it's problematic, because the Constitution requires that it be these three things. That the department model procedural justice in the internal investigations process in particular, and then everywhere. Apply the least intrusive and most effective constitutional approaches to conducting and aggressively monitoring stops, searches, and arrests. Look at what's most effective, but least intrusive. But you have to know what's happening in order to apply the changes needed to make it the best process. Right now, there's a lot that OPD doesn't know about who they're stopping or why, what's happening on stops and searches and arrests, and they need to know. And so we believe that this is one of those key recommendation goals. Create and enhance partnerships to promote alternatives to incarceration. We believe that the goal should be to drive change and to lower crime, not necessarily make arrests and incarcerate, and we challenge OPD to look for alternatives to incarceration, create and operationalize an effective mental and behavioral services model that's tailored to specific needs. The profile of Orlando, not necessarily the profile of Memphis or Chicago, but Orlando. Modernize technology, data collection, and assessment tools. Modernize technology. This will probably be a longer-term endeavor, but it's critically important. You can't, an assistant chief who used to work for me used to always say, you can't expect what you don't inspect. And if you don't know that it's happening, you can't take action on it. In order to understand what's happening, you have to invest in modernizing technology, data collection, and assessment tools in the OPD. We believe that it's important that the city and OPD serves youth and give them a voice. And again, one great vehicle for that, among others, is to embrace FPR as essential service delivery partners. Now, the wording here isn't accidental. Embrace, and not just meet with, but embrace FPR as essential service delivery partners in being necessary, as being a part of what it takes to make Orlando a safer city, a safer community, and to build trust and equity in the community. Essential service delivery partners. Implement a comprehensive recruitment and hiring strategy, reporting and assessment process. We need to make sure that we're recruiting and hiring so that those who become members of the OPD reflect the diversity of the city. The goal is to have a police department that's reflective of the service area, that has to be intentional and not just happenstance. And so we're recommending that the OPD does that it trains personnel to support a guardian-style service delivery approach where it's not the warrior, not the militaristic, but it instead look for opportunities to serve the residents, that they are prepared to do whatever is necessary. They make arrests, they stop traffic, but they are serving with the community's best interest and needs in mind, applying the least intrusive, most effective efforts to bringing this about. Provide proactive and responsive support to promote and sustain a healthy workforce. That goes to the early intervention work that I talked about. Embrace early intervention, leverage communication services to enhance operational efficiency, employee and community safety, understand how the community perceives the OPD. It takes engagement and interaction. In many instances, community members told us, we see officers come to our neighborhoods, they come out and take pictures, they come out for picnics. We want a relationship. We don't just want them to come, we want to know who they are. We want to know their names. There's a lot of community support, but they want to know the police officers. They want to know that the police are really there for them, that the police are interested in supporting the community. And then finally, leveraging communication capacities and capabilities to advance 21st century policing here in Orlando. If you look at our key recommendation goals, they start with the community, they end with the community, and in the middle are a set of internal steps that we believe, if undertaken and committed to, will help your police department be the police department that you want them to be, that your community is looking for. We believe that the work that we've done will help them get there. At this time, I'll bring Chief Womack up to to continue with this presentation. I'll come back on the end to summarize it, and then we'll go to Chief Rolon.
Good morning, Mayor Dyer and Commissioners. Thank you on behalf of the Bowman Group. As Dr. Bowman said, we appreciate you allowing us to be here. Dr. Bowman just provided what he described as a 50,000-foot view of what the work that we did over the last year. I'm going to bring it down to about 30,000 feet because we are trying to give you a snapshot of what the final report and the key findings that come out of it. This is not every finding and it's not every recommendation, but you will find those in the final report. There's 260 some odd recommendations. In the final report, you will also find detailed explanations of what the facts that we found or the information that we used to base these recommendations on. So I'm going to go over some of the key areas that we looked at as Dr. Bowman just described. Each one of these you will see, such as the community engagement. Underneath that is the guiding principles, the best practice philosophy that we use to look at the Orlando Police Department. It's the lens from which we used our assessment review on. So for community engagement, we looked at it from that idea of the OPD embracing community policing as a department-wide philosophy. You've heard Dr. Bowman say that, and you will hear me repeat it over and over again. In this area, we completed more than 90 interviews with community members. Probably in the range of several hundred community members were spoken to, information received, feedback. Several of them were multiple conversations with various groups, just to make sure that we got a good feel for what your community felt about the OPD. First finding that we have is while OPD does participate in several positive community engagement activities, the OPD's current approaches appeared to be siloed. The department does not have a comprehensive strategic focus on community policing. It's more of a program in the department, and they have various officers that are assigned to community policing, but it's not embracing it as a department-wide philosophy. As Dr. Bowman said, many of the community members related great community events as photo ops, but they wanted a better relationship with the police department. Also, we found that OPD does not currently train a community policing model or philosophy on community policing in their orientation programs and their initial training or their in-service trainings. So here are key recommendations under this area. OPD needs to develop a comprehensive community engagement strategic plan and incorporate community policing as a department-wide philosophy. In case you haven't heard that yet. OPD can consider a geographic policing model, assigning officers to predetermined geographic boundaries. This is a very operational recommendation, so if you think you want to need a little bit more information on that, it is contained in the final report. A main goal of geographic policing is to maintain assignments over time, to forge relationships within the community, apply problem-solving methods, and to reduce crime and improve the overall quality of life of your community. Let's talk use of force.
Excuse me, I'm sorry.
Commissioner
Mayor,
Barnes?
Yeah, I wanted to just get clarity on this process. When would we have an opportunity to ask questions about these recommendations? Do we wait until the end, or what is that?
Yeah, I was hoping to let them do the presentation and then ask all the
just come back
questions
at one time? Okay, thank you.
Yes, Commissioner Burns, I believe we have question and answer scheduled for the end. So let's talk use of force. The best practice guiding principles that we used to look at your use of force issue is to ensure that force used is only that which is objectively reasonable, necessary, and proportional to the threat. You heard Dr. Bowman describe that earlier. Our key findings in this area, and there are more that are contained in the final report. The current OPD use of force policy does not include clear language on several types of force used by OPD, including the deployment of canines, the use of the ECDs or the tasers, you will hear them called, and the use of chemical sprays among other things. The force choices, I'll give a little elaboration here, the force choices are broader than what you would normally see in a best practice policy for use of force. Some common best practices, such as limitations on the number of ECD cycles, the taser use should be used, and defining a canine bite as a serious use of force are absent right now from OPD's policies. Gaps in the OPD's force policies have contributed to the approval of questionable use of forces. I'll take a chance right now to tell you that the method we did for use of force, we had a team of experts in this area that took a look at your use of force, not only your policies, but actual use of force cases, body-worn camera files, complete from top to bottom review of your use of force. So this was not just a simple policy review, it was actually a practice review as well. The key recommendations for use of force: OPD should make its suite of use of force policies more comprehensive and complete by drafting new weapon-specific policies and more thoroughly incorporating requirements that the use of force should be necessary, reasonable, and proportional to the threat encountered. The policy right now is not clear and does not define that as a guiding principle. Develop a specialized use of force investigation team to conduct comprehensive investigations of the serious uses of force. It should be beyond just supervisory review. Create an internal use of force review board that will serve as a departmental quality control. To piggyback on that, internal affairs. So the guiding principle is model procedural justice in the internal affairs investigation process. I conducted this assessment myself. The key findings, I will say, one of the strengths is that the quality of your internal affairs staff is outstanding. The commitment and the training and the quality of the formal investigations that are conducted is well done. But what we did find is OPD's policies do not outline specific criteria for complaints to be assigned for a formal investigation versus supervisory referrals, and do not define general complaints. Those are the three, this is an operational thing again. Those are the three areas, the three types of complaints. What we found from talking to community members is that there is a sense that OPD does not fully investigate complaints. What we did find is that there is a communication issue back to the community on how these complaints are processed. It also found that the city of Orlando is underutilizing the Citizen Police Review Board and seems to be intentionally narrowing its focus and role. I think you have a great opportunity. You've had a Citizen Police Review Board for many years, and I believe that if you expand its use to fully incorporate those that are allowed under your ordinance. This is not to imply citizen oversight or anything like that. It is to use it to their full authority as already defined by your city ordinance. The key recommendations: clearly define the policy-specific criteria for formal investigations, supervisory referrals, and general complaints. Also ensure that the City of Orlando and OPD expands the role of the CPRB as a liaison to the community within the full scope of the authority, and utilize your Citizen Police Review Board as a communication avenue to provide the information to the community and help build that trust. It can be a communication tool between an avenue for where citizens can go for information, as well as communication back to the police department from community concerns. Stop searches and arrests. These are constitutional issues. There is a plethora of best practice on stop searches and arrests. There's a plethora of case law on arrest, search, and seizures. This is not a gray area. This is something that you have to be very, very clear as a police department on understanding what you do and what you can't do and what you should be doing. This is a community trust issue. We looked at this in order to make sure that OPD is applying the least intrusive and most effective constitutional approaches to conducting and aggressively monitoring stop searches and arrests. Key findings: OPD's policies and procedures include over 30 various policies, training bulletins, operation manuals that have some guiding languages for stop, searches, and/or arrests. There is not an overall policy in this area. Overall, the collection of policies and training bulletins represent kind of an opaque hodgepodge of instructions in a very weak policy system that doesn't effectively incorporate critical guiding principles. Also, OPD fails to collect appropriate data regarding stops, searches, and arrests. We talked about this, and we'll talk more about data in a little bit. But OPD does not currently document and collect data on all stops, and OPD does not require the documentation of searches of any kind. The key recommendations. Clearly, develop operational policies based on the guiding principles for every basic enforcement action OPD takes, including but not limited to all stops, searches, and arrests, use of force, engagement with the community, and investigative activities. Second, develop a set of policies concerning fair and impartial policing that include guiding principles for all department operations to include procedural justice, impartial policing, community policing, and de-escalation. And require documentation of all searches and stop types, including all warrantless search types. You have to collect data on your searches. Let's talk for a little bit about the Alternative Response Program. So it's to create and enhance partnerships to promote alternatives to incarceration. Dr. Bowman described that earlier. Key recommendations. This is a new area, so we're giving you some key recommendations in this area. Develop a telecommunications, this is your dispatch center, specific crisis intervention team, or include the telecommunications in the 40-hour CIT training. Prioritize response of CIT officers under the new model to calls for service involving a mental health component. Develop a system for identifying mental health calls at the 911 center and at OPD, and develop and educate and execute a public education campaign. Which brings us to the mental and behavioral health areas. So this is to create and operationalize an effective mental and behavioral services model tailored to specific needs. So the key recommendations in this area, we know you have a pilot program with Aspire for mental health responses. So this is to expand upon what you're already doing. Revise the CIT policy significantly, including input from key city and community entities. Establish clear criteria for dispatch to identify these types of calls. That's missing in this area. Develop a protocol for telecommunications to know which officers are CIT certified without having to request the units over the air. Your dispatchers in your call center should already know who's on duty, who is CIT certified, and not have to hunt and search for those officers. Develop a formal CIT report that includes demographics, behaviors observed, if weapons were present and what type, whether or not an officer is CIT, disposition, was it resolved at the scene, was it transported voluntarily, Baker acted, arrest types, city ordinances, felony, non-felony, etc., and use of force. And determine and execute robust data collection, both internally and externally relating to CIT. We've said a lot about this, and there is a very, very robust discussion in the final report on the data collection issue. You see snippets of this as a theme that runs all the way through the entire assessment. So this is kind of an encapsulation of what we found. You need to modernize the technology, improve the data collection, and the assessment tools. The key there I want you to keep in mind is the assessment tools. You cannot fix what you don't know. I said it a little differently than Dr. Bowman, but you cannot address an issue that you are not aware of. And the biggest way to be not aware of it is don't collect the data about it. So the key recommendations in this area is enhance transparency by providing data on arrests, force, traffic stops, searches, and the overall accountability system. Record and collect data that will allow for more robust and accurate benchmarking to assess possible racial bias. Conduct additional analysis and investigation to understand the reasons behind observed racial disparities and proactively address them. The current data, although limited, has some racial disparity indicators in it that need to be addressed. This should include exploration of systemic concerns driven by policy or standard practice, as well as pragmatic approaches to address an individual behavior. So let's talk about your youth programming. And I did this specific one myself as well. Your school resource officer program. It's to serve local youth and give them a voice. Key recommendations. The key findings Dr. Bowman went over initially. I was very impressed with your school resource program and the partnership they have with Orange County Schools, particularly after the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas law went into effect and the efforts and the steps that have been taken to implement the requirements of that. So the key recommendations from this area. School resource section lacks a clear policy. There is no policy, or there wasn't at the time. I'm assuming there is soon, that clearly outlines the mission and the guiding principles for the school resource program in terms of the appropriateness of school policing, school-based policing. Incorporate the language contained in the agreements with Orange County Public Schools into the SRO policy as guiding principles. There are 2 agreements that the City of Orlando entered into with the Orange County Schools and other entities in the school system. The language in that is very, very clear and does contain language of best practice within school-based policing. Review the school resource policy annually and update as necessary. And also better collaborate with the Orange County Public Schools to expand school resource officer section annual training requirements for officers and school personnel to include youth-focused mental health, adolescent development, school-based implicit bias, and additional specific needs specific to kids in schools for the officers. Other youth-related programs that were looked at, and as Dr. Bowman said, have a very robust opportunities for youth to be engaged in this community. You have explorers, you have the youth community coordinator that Chief Roland assigned with various programs and opportunities for youth to be involved, as well as you have some great community partnerships, such as your Dueling Dragons program, and I know that the director is here for that today, so I commend that. I had the opportunity to see that program in action, and I was very impressed. So the Family Parks and Recreation, the FPR. I had the opportunity to sit and talk at length with the director of FPR and several of her key supervisors and managers. The OPD and the City of Orlando need to embrace FPR as an essential service delivery partner. It's a way to increase and improve those areas that you can look for alternatives to incarceration. The FPR staff provided me with a series of recommendations on how they thought and ideas they had to strengthen the partnership with OPD. Those have been provided to OPD and are contained in the final report. So one of the key recommendations that's not on the slide that you see here, but one of the key recommendations is to have OPD sit down with the FPR staff and go through the recommendations they had and see where they can come to expand mutual partnerships between OPD and the Families, Parks, and Recreation. So also to ensure that OPD develop and sustain that ongoing collaboration with FPR to continue to discuss ways and avenues to strengthen the partnership between the departments and improve the outreach to youth opportunities. Let's stop siloing this area. Let's work in collaborative partnerships. Also, there is some concern over enforcement activities from the view of the FPR staff. It's recommended that OPD conduct a detailed analysis of their juvenile arrests and enforcement activities. Outcomes from this analysis should be used to guide any necessary policy and procedural changes. Recruitment and hiring. You have good cops if you hire good cops. You have to be very specific and targeted in your recruitment and your hiring. You want to implement a comprehensive recruitment and hiring strategy and report and assess what the outcomes of your recruitment program is. Key recommendations in this area. Develop a recruitment standard operating procedure to foster and promote more of an emphasis on diversity and recruitment efforts. Add a guardian-style policing is more of the OPD's identity in their recruitment materials. You want to recruit for what you want your community to see from your police department. Research cloud-based systems such as ESO for collection and retention of background information and data. Integrate recruitment data into analytic platforms. That means that if you are successful in recruiting very, very good community policing officers, you want to replicate that recruitment effort to get more. Combine relevant recruitment data to evaluate recruitment trends and if the milestones and the goals that you have in place are met. Officer training. Look to train your personnel to support Guardian-style service delivery approach. Key recommendations in this area. Incorporate de-escalation into the philosophy of the organization. Create a more robust annual training plan that addresses human relations training on an annual basis and ensures at least one human relations topic is taught each year. Consider introducing training constructs cognizant of developing a whole officer and reinforcing teamwork and active bystandership as critical officer education components to astutely point out OPD training is more than just tactics and firearms. Adopt a traffic stop format based upon, for example, Calpost 8-step model or similar model to ensure the tenets of procedural justice and bias-free policing. It's the voice, it's the respect, it's the neutrality, are also to interject that into the traffic stop routine and are followed automatically as they're embedded into the curriculum. Officer wellness. In order to foster community policing, in order to foster good relationships, as Dr. Bowman discussed, having good relationships internally as well as externally starts with officer wellness. Provide a proactive and responsive support to promote and sustain a healthy workforce. Key recommendations: develop a policy or a standard operating procedure for officer wellness as indicated in the Officer Wellness Strategic Plan. Work with the city HR to evaluate the well-researched 5-year Officer Assistant Strategic Plan. Work with HR to conduct a needs assessment related to officer wellness, and work with HR to evaluate external versus internal clinical models for officer mental health services within the City of Orlando, OPD, or outside services and resources for officers. Early intervention program. This is clearly a best practice in policing. If you recognize behaviors of your officers early before it becomes misconduct or excessive use of force or any other issue like that, you can go a long way to developing these relationships that you have internally as well as with your community. You want to embrace an early intervention system to support this employee retention. The key recommendations: revise the Early Intervention Program Policy 2207.3 to describe the nature and purpose of the EI program, including that it is non-disciplinary and at the very beginning of the policy. Officers often balk at the early interventions because it feels disciplinary in nature. Ensure that it has a balanced focus of identifying and addressing at-risk behavior and officer mental health and wellness. Ensure the communication and training of the EI program is provided department-wide. Consider including additional performance indicators in the EI program, such as vehicle collisions, pursuits, traffic, pedestrian stops, arrests, firearms, discharges, domestic violence issues, including officers subject to restraining orders, failure to appear in court, sick leave abuse, mandatory counseling, searches and seizures, training records, transfers, secondary employment, officer injuries. Any number of these things can be an indicator of an officer in crisis. Consider including positive performance indicators in the EI program, along with the adverse events to achieve a balance. So supervisors have a holistic view of an officer's attitude, behavior, and work history. Emergency communications and dispatch. We looked at your communications issues from two different perspectives. One is your internal communication among the employees, the admin and the staff, communications with the community. This section is about your emergency dispatch and your emergency communications. Leverage communication services to enhance the overall operational efficiency and employee and community safety. Key recommendations here. Institute hiring processes in line with the recommended best practices of several entities such as the Association of Public Safety Communications Officials and the Commission on Accreditation for Law Enforcement, which is referred to as CALEA, to include pre-employment psychological examinations for emergency communications section new hires. It's not currently part of the hiring process. Conduct a complete workload analysis and staffing study to determine if reliance on overtime to maintain minimum staffing levels continues to be efficient and effective. This is something that we see in agencies across the nation. Dispatch centers routinely have mandatory overtime and mandatory callbacks because of staffing levels in the dispatch center. I found your dispatch center to be fully staffed and still relying heavily on overtime to maintain staffing levels. Consider and implement all recommendations outlined under the critical incident response and alternative response programs to include trained mental health clinicians as emergency communications staff members for mental health calls, and provide mental health crisis response training annually for all ECS personnel. There was a targeted community survey that was conducted. We have some recommendations on how to continue that and get a more robust return and more robust information from this. This is done to understand the community's perception of the value of the OPD services that are provided. Key recommendations. Revise the survey language to align more with the tenets of procedural justice and police legitimacy. In future targeted community surveys, consider including questions that align with the tenets of procedural justice and police legitimacy, such as asking community members about their interaction with OPD and feeling respected, listened to, and whether the matter was taken seriously, whether the situation was explained to them, and whether the decision was fair. And consider using survey findings to talk to officers about how to better communicate with victims. Community assessment, this communications assessment, this is your public information function. Leverage communication capabilities to advance the 21st policing model. Key recommendations in this area. Further develop a collaborative written communication strategy with the city's Office of Communications. Create a written protocol for handling the external and internal messaging during critical incidents, including officer-involved shootings and incidents captured on body-worn camera video. There is also a recommendation that Chief Roland is aware of to update the body-worn camera video policy as well. Develop a crisis communication plan to include a consistent and transparent process for releasing information, and establish protocol for consistent information sharing and releasing of body-worn camera footage following critical incidents. And I will return it to Dr. Bowman.
Thank you, Chief. Again, this final presentation work represents the composite of our work. We're honored to have the opportunity to come into Orlando and assist with this. While many of our recommendations appear to be critical, they really are very critical first steps in building community trust with the police department here. And we know that improving this trust and accountability will also improve the ability of the OPD to work with the residents to co-produce public safety as partners. So in doing so, uses of force will be reduced and the jobs of police officers will be made much more safe and satisfying. So we thank Chief Roland again for access to the OPD. Everything we asked for, the chief provided. Many of the personnel assistance that were needed, the chief did it all. So thank you, Chief. Thank you to the mayor, your office, and to the city and other staff and employees. But more than anybody, the community members, hundreds of community members were heard. We've listened. We've heard what the community has said. And this work represents the thoughts and ideas and feelings of many of the people that we've interacted with. So we'll come back later with questions. Thank you all.
Thank you, Dr. Bowman. Let's hear from the chief.
If you could get my presentation up, please.
Yep.
Yep, got it. Let's get it beginning. Thank you. Mayor, Commissioners, good morning. And Dr. Bowman, thank you. Chief Womack, thank you. Let me start by saying that, I was very skeptical before we went into this journey. And I will tell you that I 100% embrace the outcome of this process. I also must say that we are an accredited agency and we just went through our reaccreditation process and we passed with flying colors. So it goes to show that when you feel that you are 100% on point on the way that you should be running an organization and the way you should be serving our citizens, that there's always room for improvement, and even the best of the best who are responsible for determining whether you are at the level of being accredited may be sometimes at odds or not even in line with what we should be doing best to serve our communities. With that said, it has been nearly a year since Mayor Dyer announced the Community Trust and Equity Initiative and with the support of the City Council. With the announcement, the citizens of this community were reassured that the City of Orlando would do what it always has done best, to listen to the needs and concerns of our citizens and respond responsibly to change. Two key initiatives were announced when this was done at the Orlando Police Department. The first was Dr. Randy Nelson with Bethune-Cookman, the Center for Law and Social Justice, to launch a unique community engagement program in the Paramore, Mercy Drive, and Washington Shores neighborhoods. The engagement program involved interactive training with Orlando police officers, together with Orlando residents, youth, and community leaders. The second initiative, of course, the Bowman Group. The city hired the Bowman Group as a consultant to do a comprehensive review of the Orlando Police Department. Dr. Bowman, a former police chief and deputy city manager for the city of Arlington, Texas, with over 30 years of experience leading and managing public safety operations, led the comprehensive review, as you know. Many department staff and community members contributed to the evaluation process. While the evaluation was taking place, I was often told how impressed the evaluators were with our department staff and the exceptional work being done here at the Orlando Police Department. So what are the next steps? We must do a thorough review of these recommendations. My executive staff, not only the deputy chiefs, but the captains, lieutenants, sergeants, everyone will be thoroughly involved in this process. We have got to develop a development strategy. That's going to take some time, but it has to be a priority that we get this started ASAP. We have to identify an implementation team. I have to say, it will take some heavy lifting in order to accomplish this. and we have a lot of things going on at the Orlando Police Department. This will be a priority, but identifying who will be responsible for this implementation or taking lead and making it a reality will be job one for us. We have to prioritize these recommendations as it has been suggested. We have to make sure we have the means and the capabilities in order to make them possible. We will need the support, we will have to identify the support needed to make these recommendations a reality. And the Citizens Police Review Board, and if I may, if Ms. Linda Reeves, Mr. Tom Keene, Ms. Giles, and Mr. Corey Ingalls, if they're present, if you could stand, I understand. Thank you very much for being here. I could not agree more how important the Citizens Police Review Board can play a role in us being able to better find ways or solutions to better serve our citizens. So the work is going to be heavy, and we will rely on you to support our process. And the support from city department and staff. You know, it was mentioned that we must work with the Family Parks and Recreation. And I can tell you, and Commissioner Ortiz can relate to this, as former member of the Neighborhood Patrol Unit, a robust program that we had at the Orlando Police Department that unfortunately, due to an uptick in violent crime, we had to do away with many years ago. That was the conduit for many of our officers to engage our community in a positive way, especially our youth, especially through our recreation centers. I lived at the Englewood Neighborhood Center. I spent all of my hours of a working day working with the youth at the Englewood Neighborhood Center. And that was sort of a path that our officers followed to be able to become part of that neighborhood patrol unit, to one day be able to do that in our communities in a proactive way that we lost, but we're working on re-implementing here at the Orlando Police Department. So during this evaluation process, we did not sit idle. And in fact, we continue to do a lot of proactive work. Dr. Randy Nelson, as mentioned, with Bethune-Cookman, worked with the Paramore, Washington Shores, and Mercy Drive communities. Recommendation pillars were identified, and we're in the process now of implementing those. Patrol captains will have the responsibility of making sure that those recommendations are carried through. The 8 can't wait, as you recall, this was very important during the period when people demanded that some significant changes take place right away. The ban on chokeholds, the escalation training, duty to intervene, that was already part of our DNA, but we found that it was not clearly defined in policy, as it was mentioned here early. When it comes to the escalation training, I'll just give you an example of how well that works. Just this past weekend, an individual with a rifle and a gun sat on a chair on the median in the east side of Orlando at an intersection. It was called in by our citizens. Our officers showed up, approached the individual, he got in his car and took off. We had to do a felony stop. During that felony stop, the officers were able to peacefully get the individual to comply. He came out of his vehicle and we avoided a potential officer-involved shooting situation because of the de-escalation training that we provide our officers. Internal affairs, the software that was mentioned, has been in the works for some time. We hope that the software will be in place sooner than not. Early intervention is very critical and important, as it should be for all law enforcement agencies, and a strong emphasis is being placed on this across our nation, to be honest. Consistency and discipline is another area that we found that we were lacking. You know, we are deviating from past practice in some cases. The software that we hope to have in place will help us address that in the future. Active bystandership for law enforcement, the ABLE program. This is a program that you must request to be considered to be selected, where officers received this type of training. At the time when we were accepted to do this last year, we were one of only 100 agencies across the country, and we have 18,000 law enforcement agencies plus in the United States that was accepted to provide this training to all of our officers. I took the training. Every member of this agency will have this training. Accountability and standards unit, as it was mentioned, a better system to best process when a response to resistance is submitted for a thorough review. We requested the staffing, and thanks to you, we were granted the staffing to make this a reality. But I must also tell you that on average, the Orlando Police Department responds to over 300,000 calls for service each year, or at least contacts with citizens. We had over 200 or so uses of responsive resistance, use of force. That number has declined significantly since 2014. The number of arrests that we're making has declined significantly. The number of juveniles arrested has declined significantly. Our SROs last year made one arrest during the entire school year. It was a 19-year-old who battered a school administrator. So our efforts are working, but they can become better. The Citizens Police Review Board, now those meetings are attended by a deputy chief, a captain, our training staff. Mandatory that we have someone there. I think the Citizens Police Review Board appreciates how involved we have become with their process. And I'm telling you, from day one when I was given the honor of leading this agency, I also mentioned the importance of working with our Citizens Police Review Board. It is a must that we must do. The new body-worn cameras, you know, a lot of agencies don't have the luxury that we have to have a mayor and city council that's very supportive of law enforcement. These cameras will allow us to also track when an officer draws their weapon, when an officer turns on their taser. We did not have that before, but thanks to your support, we will be able to see whether in a squad of 10, maybe one officer is more inclined than another to draw their weapon. Maybe one officer doesn't draw their weapon at all. Is it an officer safety issue? So the technology is improving thanks to the support that you have given us to make this possible. The Youth Outreach Coordinator, nothing like it, in my opinion, anywhere in Central Florida, and I would venture to say in many parts of the country. Just got an update from our Youth Outreach Coordinator, who's Corporal Marcus Hyatt. And I hope that we will be able to do, I need to discuss this with CEO Edmonds, we will be able to do a workshop on the great work that has been done and what's coming. We will have a youth summit, a parent summit, something that we have never done before, all because of the great work that is being done here. The Neighborhood Patrol Unit, thanks to you, we received additional staffing to create a squad, and I reorganized to create an additional squad, and as soon as our staffing levels get better, we will have that in play. The Junior Reserve Law Enforcement Program that is being spearheaded by our Youth Outreach Coordinator, 90 students at Jones High School, 180 students at Lake Nona, all wanting to learn more about the law enforcement career and how they maybe one day can join our noble profession. The community response team and its pilot stage, again, as it was mentioned, it has been very beneficial for the Orlando Police Department and our community as a whole, and we see a good future there. Officer Wellness Committee, again, key. We have to have a healthy organization in order to better serve. We have got to take care of the needs of our officers, and that is in the works. And soon we will be announcing a group violence reduction initiative, and also in partnership with FPR, another program that they will be announcing. I think you will be very pleased with what you will hear once we finalize all the details on that. In the Florida Police Chiefs Association Subcommittee on Accountability and Societal Change, I was part of that committee, selected as one of the chiefs from the association to be part of this subcommittee, and I'm telling you, a lot of the recommendations have been shared with other agencies, and a lot of these things were things that we were already doing here in Central Florida. So the initial takeaways. We definitely have an opportunity to improve the overall data collection. So it's easy to say we want to improve the data, but it takes a lot of IT support, dedicated staffing, a lot of changes with our platforms that also communicate with other entities such as the state attorney's office, our jails, and what have you. So that's probably going to be one of the most challenging tasks, but one that we have got to make the #1 priority, in my opinion. The improvement of documentation of citizen encounter, stop, searches, and arrests, I could not agree more. You know, we are, again, accredited, following best practices, looking at policies constantly from other areas on ways that we can improve the way we collect data. And what we found during this process was that there were areas that we could improve upon, definitely. So this is going to take a lot of work to implement, to make sure that we put it all to work so that our system can collect the data. But again, as part of the overall data collection, key priority. Community Policing Department philosophy, that one sort of surprised me. And the reason being is that I am a 29-year member of this agency. I grew up in the Orlando Police Department with community-oriented policing. It's all I knew growing up as an officer and being promoted through the ranks. But I think when we did away with the neighborhood patrol unit, we lost that. And we have over 200 officers that have joined the Orlando Police Department just in the last couple of years. And guess where those officers are assigned? They're assigned to patrol. Those officers hear from day one that we want them to be very proactive in getting to know the community, but we don't have the mechanism that is being mentioned on this report to really put a strong emphasis on the importance of community policing. I thought that's the way that we did things here, but obviously the outcome of this report shows that we still can do better in educating our officers on how to embrace what community policing truly means and what should look like. On enhanced transparency, we have tried to work in this area for many years. We were one of the first agencies to ask the Obama administration at the time to be included in the Police Data Initiative so that we can share information with our citizen. And I even mentioned it during when I was sworn in, that we have got to have these dashboards that allow for citizens to see what's happening all the time in our city. And also internally, we have got to see what we're doing in order to adjust and address our activities better. We have made great improvements internally, but externally, there's areas of importance or of improvements. The importance of officer wellness, we've talked about this already, is key for our department to be healthy both physically and mentally. And the Citizens Police Review Board, again, a lot of work is coming your way. And we appreciate all the support you have given us to make the changes that we have made. So recommendations for ways to support our efforts to be more transparent. It'll take us working with our city family to make sure that we have all the support mechanism and the best recommendations in order to make this possible. And the use of force. And again, we agree that we have to be more specific on the way we have this defined in policy, but I'll revert back to what I said a few minutes ago. 200 plus response to resistance, all-time low compared to 2014. We continue to make, we're doing a better job in this area. We're just going to have to define what is the ideal number. Is it 0 in an ideal world? Yes. Is it 200 or so for every 300,000 contacts with citizens? The use of force, like they mentioned, was it necessary? I think that's the one question that we're going to have to answer as we collect more data. But we're definitely low or down when it comes to response to resistance. And continue the importance of de-escalation. Again, we could not agree more. That is something that we'll continue to work on and stress to all of our officers. The expand the crisis intervention training, we asked for specific training to be given to our officers about a year ago. The response back was, we don't have the instructors available for you to get the 40-hour CIT training. We kept pushing. We just signed an agreement, and we are going to train an additional 300 officers of the Orlando Police Department in the CIT training. So the following is part of a message that I sent on Friday to the personnel of the Orlando Police Department. Although initially I was skeptical about what this process would yield, I am convinced that we indeed needed this process, and it has exceeded my expectations. Mayor Dyer and the City Council's investment to bring this evaluation to fruition is significant, and in many instances, one that many other law enforcement agencies will not be willing to make due to other priorities or needs. The Orlando Police Department has been a leader in the industry. As we implement the recommendations in this evaluation, they will result in the bar being raised even higher for agencies striving to emulate the Orlando Police Department. I anticipate that many agencies will endeavor to replicate the recommendations of the Bowman's Group evaluation of our agency, and I believe that the citizens in other communities will expect their law enforcement agencies to follow suit. The members of this great agency and the citizens we serve will be the benefactors of the implementations of these recommendations by the Bowman Group. We can all agree there's always room for improvement, and the law enforcement profession recognizes the importance of adjusting to change. To implement these recommendations will take a lot of hard work, but this will require the unequivocal support of the members of the Orlando Police Department, especially from the deputy chiefs, captains, lieutenants, and sergeants, to lead the way in the implementation of the recommendations. We must work in unison to elevate our department to the next level. The Orlando Police Department has had the distinction of always leading the way. I am extremely proud of the great work of the members of the Orlando Police Department that they do every day. And these recommendations will make our police department better for generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief, and I'm also very proud of the Orlando Police Department. I think we're one of the best agencies in the country, but I want to thank you personally and the force as a whole to being open to this review. There probably would be a lot of agencies that wouldn't have been open to such a thorough review, and I also thank you for embracing the recommendations and being willing to implement them. And Dr. Bowman, thank you for the great work that's been done. It's very telling that it's a passion of your group to make sure that we make law enforcement the very best that it can be. So thank you all for that. Questions? Commissioner Burns and Commissioner Hill.
I'm staying here just in case.
All right, thank you, Mayor, and I also would like to say thank you to the Bowman Group for your work, but also to you, Chief, for being open to this this type of analysis. You know, I've been city commissioner for about a year and a half, a little bit over a year and a half, and I can say during this time I've got an opportunity to meet a lot of our officers up close. And I know that we have some fine women and men who serve us every day, and I thank them for that. So I have several questions. One, when we were looking at some of the areas for, and this is for the Bowman Group, when we were looking at some of the areas for improvement, did you find where the collective bargaining agreement restricts or inhibits any of the progress that needs to happen?
Commissioner Burns, the collective, we view the collective bargaining agreement as a necessary agreement between the city, the officers, the union, the police department. As they go, there are aspects of the agreement that makes it difficult to hold officers accountable. But I think maybe a more difficult condition is probably the Peace Officers Bill of Rights here in Florida, and the collective bargaining agreement is somewhat reflective of that. So it is a challenge, but at the same time, a reality that has to be dealt with and lived with.
Okay, great, thank you. Another, when we talk about the training of our new recruits, and this was a question that I've always had, does our trainers who are training our new recruits, what type of additional training do they receive? Do they receive some type of racial animus training? Because we know that oftentimes the trainers will pass on their habits and things that they've seen. And did you get a chance to review what that looks like from the trainer's standpoint? And are there any recommendations there?
Sure. Is Bill Murphy on the line? Our representative, Deputy Chief William Murphy from Los Angeles Police Department actually conducted the on-site review of training. I can say if, I don't know if Bill's on or not, but what I can say to you, Commissioner Burns, is the Recruit Academy is largely controlled by FDLE. Florida Department of Law Enforcement. And so the city and the police department has a limited opportunity to impact the instructor's instruction curricula of the Recruit Police Academy. For that reason, we didn't focus just a whole lot on the academy because of the limitations. What we did look at is training inside the Orlando Police Department and the in-service training, the curricula, the conditions around the in-service training. And we note that there is an opportunity, and we pose as one of our recommendations to really increase impartial policing training, bias-free policing training per se, and that instructors who put on that training obviously have to be qualified in the instruction that they're teaching. I can't say specifically how many hours, I don't recall, I don't have that reduced to memory, but I can tell you based on our observation, there is a need for not just the department, but to make sure that the instructors are appropriately trained in all of those areas. Chief?
Hey, I'm here, by the way. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yep.
Okay.
If I could add
Go
real
ahead,
quick,
Chief.
and once they come on board, then we give them 11 weeks of additional training before we put them out on the street, right? And that's where programs like the ABLE, the Active Bystandership for Law Enforcement, we take the initiative of bringing that additional training that addresses exactly what you're referring to, Commissioner. We did that proactively. We didn't wait for someone to tell us that we needed to do it.
And Chief, so that was something that was recent implementation?
We submitted our application last year. We finally got approved, and then we began the training. We started the training with myself, the deputy chiefs, the training staff. We went through it. We did the train the trainer, and now every officer is required to receive this training at the Orlando Police Department, just like the CIT training.
Great, thank you.
And Commissioner Burns, I believe Chief Murphy is on the line, but your question is specific to the FTOs, the field training officers. Yes, they do receive additional training to be those field training officers, whether there is specific to racial animus and the different things like that as the FTOs in the field. FTOs are required to be certified with additional training.
Okay. Also,
And in addition to that, just to add to the FTOs, all of your instructors are certified by the state. They have to go through instructor development courses. When they have, say if they're going to teach firearms, they have to be certified by the state. Any type of tactics, they're certified by the state. I can give you a rundown. I did spend a considerable amount of time also in the academy understanding it, because that's job number one. You know, you're going to inherit those recruits after 770 hours from the state. So it was important for me to understand how they were taught and how that would impact your orientation program, your FTO program, and in-service. So they are well trained. I got to see them for 4 days on site. I watched them run a lot of scenarios and teach classes. So they definitely do get instructor training from the state.
all right, thank you. Also, with the, kind of along those same lines, with the new recruits, is there a suggestion or recommendation for racial animus screening for our new recruits? Does that currently happen, or is there room to make that happen? Or was that even looked at or a recommendation?
Chief Murphy, do you have that response?
Yeah, generally on that type of training, I was in charge of, let me give you a little background for myself. I retired as deputy chief in Los Angeles Police Department. I was in charge of all training, use of force, and personnel. Normally you're gonna, on the hiring process, you run that type of, in California it was called Calpost 10 competencies, and you'd have trained psychologists in the interview process go through that type of stuff. When you get to training though, and if you like, I can explain the whole guardian versus warrior, and we can tie this all together, but I don't know if you want me to get into that at the particular time.
No, what I'm more concerned about the screening versus the training, because I'm saying screening before we even get them to the point of needing that training.
Yeah, that's in the hiring process, and you should be doing that. That was not my role here. Maybe somebody else would know it, but that's traditionally where you'd have that.
Yeah, so that's my question.
Okay.
Is that type of screening for new recruits or potential new recruits in place? If so, I'd like to hear about it, but if not, is that a recommendation?
I think Chief wants to say something. We have a set of recommendations around hiring and recruitment our recommendation is to improve the hiring and recruitment programs so that the department reflects the diversity of the community. That type of screening is part and parcel of the effort to improve the recruitment and the recruitment outcomes. And so, yeah, absolutely, yes. Is it specifically in there? Not specifically, but it is part of our overall recommendation and is a requirement to increase the diversity and the desirable outcomes in that effort.
Explain that, because you said it's in there but not specifically. So my question is there a recommendation for racial animus screening for new recruits? Okay,
Commissioner, new recruits have been selected.
Okay, well, before they are new recruits in the selection process.
Okay, there is a recommendation to screen applicants for improprieties, okay? There is not a specific recommendation that says, and applicants should be specifically screened for racial animus. But what our recommendation says is that the hiring and recruitment processes should be improved to produce a more diverse outcome. For us, producing a more diverse outcome includes screening for those kinds of tendencies that would make a recruit undesirable. We don't specifically say racial animus, but in our recommendation to improve hiring and recruitment activities, we imply that in order to produce the desirable results.
Right. Is there any way that I guess that language could be stronger? Because when you say imply,
the process,
it could seem like it could be missed.
Commissioner, the steps to hire a new officer has various aspects to it. One of those is a police psychological. There are best practice standards and the battery of tests that a new applicant would be put through that is in place. Recommendation to improve the hiring and the recruiting process would also include taking a look at the psychological portion of it that should be screening for that very thing. So it really is taking, instead of a specific for that one thing, these battery of tests and the process that they go through would identify addictive personalities, racial animus, various other types of things that are not wanted in a police applicant. So this is, yours is a very specific to an overall process that is used and intended to identify those very tendencies. So an improvement of the recruitment and the hiring process would also include a look at all of the hiring processes and the steps that you go through to do that. What you're looking at is something that would and could and should be identified in the psychological testing.
And if I could add, we'll get with HR to find out how all city employees are processed, because they obviously regulate how we hired our officers, to see how they have addressed that and where in the process specifically they have made it a point to identify what you're looking for. Also, please keep in mind the following: the Orlando Police Department, 4,000 to 4,500 applicants each year. About half of those get an opportunity to go through in a full application process, and then out of that, we may select 100. So that's how selective and how much of a background process we put in for all of them. Many get disqualified for many reasons, but that's how selective our process is right now.
And Commissioner, one last thought from me. We talk about now is kind of the jumping off point to create a strategic plan. Now is the great opportunity to have these conversations and get down to more the specifics that you want and expect in the hiring process, in the internal affairs process, and in the processes that we've taken a look at. So now's a good time to make those specifications. We stopped at 216. We could have gone 10 times that number. Nobody would have read them, but I think now's the time to have this conversation, and it's not too late to include that as you, the city, and the department moves forward with these recommendations.
Okay, thank you. Through your analysis or with your recommendations, is there anything that addresses race-conscious policing? Any recommendations around race-conscious policing? Yeah, again, Commissioner, our terminology that we use is fair and impartial policing, also bias-free policing. The race consciousness is couched within those terms. Okay, great, thank you. I think I have two more questions, Mayor. I remember there being a discussion when we talk about the trust of the community. Mm-hmm. And I know there was a discussion about the body cam footage and the timing of that being made available to the public. And I know, and I believe Chief mentioned to me that oftentimes that footage is delayed because the case has been forwarded to FDLE. Is there any recommendations or review around that process and delaying that release of that footage? Because I think oftentimes when the footage is not released, the community gets more concerned. So was there any discussion or any recommendations around that?
Yes, Commissioner. We actually have had, I believe, conversations with Chief Roland on this very topic. We recommend that sooner is better than later. Different communities have different timetables, but the community typically likes a quicker release. But that must be balanced with other concerns. One, the prosecutor's office, FDLE, what they recommend and require. If there are criminal implications that might be compromised by the release of a body-worn camera footage at a certain time. So I think the department just has to make a decision that these number of hours or these number of days are our target days to release body-worn camera footage. They have to work with the prosecutor, with FDLE to say this is what we want to do, and then move forward with it from a policy perspective. But we do advocate sooner versus later, more transparency versus less transparency.
So being more on a case-by-case basis and not just a general, it's been sent to FDLE, so we're not going to release it until they finish. Because I think that was kind of the approach.
I think it's important to have a policy for release at a certain time period, and then sending it out for other considerations to be the exception rather than the rule. Now, again, that has to be balanced with Florida law, Florida state requirements, but it is our position and what we advocate nationally in other departments, quicker release as a standard, with the caveat that sometimes there are other overwhelming concerns that will cause us to not be able to release this footage quickly.
Okay. Also, when we talk about use of force, the use of force matrix, has it been, did you all analyze that to see if it needed to be expanded, reduced, or any changes need to take place around that?
Yes, the entire use of force policy, the matrix, the practices was absolutely reviewed, and there are specific recommendations to, there are not recommendations to expand, there's actually recommendations to contract.
To contract, okay, thank you. And then my last one is, and it deals with the Citizens Review Board and the timing of cases coming to the Citizens Review Board. Because it's my understanding that once a case is presented to the Citizens Review Board, that it has been adjudicated, you know, everything has been resolved, and then seems like they're kind of put in a position of receiving the information but not really being able to have an impact in that particular case, but more moving forward. Is there any recommendations to any changes of the timing when information gets to the review board?
Commissioner Burns, this is where your question regarding the CBA and the Florida Police Bill of Rights come into play. The Bill of Rights is very specific as to the investigative steps, and the internal investigation is not releasable, even under the sunshine laws here in Florida, until it is complete. At that point, it can be reviewed, but the CBA does not allow for input into disciplinary matters from the Citizen Police Review Board. So the timing that they're getting it is that it is complete and disciplinary decisions have been made. Now, it can be given to the Citizen Police Review Board before any grievances or arbitration occurs, and that's what usually increases the time frame for this for the review board to get it. So if there's something in there, but upon closing the investigation, it can go to the Citizen Police Review Board, and that is something that should work with that. But in terms of being able for them to have input or impact into the outcome of the investigation or the discipline, those are restricted by the Officer Bill of Rights and the CBA.
Now, and back to the Officers' Bill of Rights and the CBA, so are there any things outside of the Officers' Bill of Rights and impact on the CBA that there's any recommendations to our negotiating team that we may want to consider when going back to the table with speaking to our unions about the next agreement? There
is a recommendation in the Internal Affairs section to reach out and work with the FOP with the possibility of improving the efficiency of the disciplinary decision-making process. So it's very cumbersome the way it's set up. This is a CBA question. It's very cumbersome the way it's set up in policy as to how it goes up, it goes down, it's grieved here, it goes there. I think Chief Rolone touched on that, on the inconsistencies they see in the disciplinary areas, and there is a recommendation to work with the FOP to determine if there is a common ground that can improve that efficiency. Yes, there is.
Okay, thank you. And that's it for me, Mayor.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Hill.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you to the Bowman Group for your intense and detailed analysis over these 5,000 hours. Quite impressive. Hear you loud and clear with your recommendations, and of course, Chief, I know that you have a passion when it comes to community policing. Yourself, when you were deputy chief, and Lisa Early traveled throughout the nation trying to find best practices to bring back home, to implement, to close that gap when we start talking about neighborhood patrolling, 21st century policing. I do have a few questions. And of course, I do want to add that I am a big supporter of Chief, and especially the fine men and women of OPD. But this study came about because of George Floyd, an African-American man murdered in the streets of Minnesota, I believe. And what will we do after that as a nation when it comes to equity and inclusion and law enforcement? No, not just Orlando, but throughout the nation. So what I did not hear a lot of, I do have a question about something that you said, Mr. Bowman. And I want to know, what is it that OPD don't know about stop and searches? Because you alluded to the fact there's a lot they don't know. So I need to know what they don't know so we can make sure that we get them the resources to know.
Okay, Zoe, are you on the line? If so, I'll bring up Zoe
Sure.
Thorkelson, Dr. Thorkelson. who was very active in the data analysis for the department, to give about a 1-minute specific response to your statement.
It can be more than a minute,
Okay, okay.
because
Well-
this is very important.
Well, we have
Don't tell me.
whatever amount of time you have.
Absolutely.
So if Zoe is on, let's bring up Zoe, and we'll have Zoe comment on that. Zoe, if you can put on.
So I just want to
your
make sure I'm understanding the question. The question is about.
So Dr.
what
Bowman
the-
stated in his presentation that it was some things that OPD don't know about stop and searches. And I want to know, what was that about? What is it that they don't know that you found?
Yes, okay.
Because this is very important when it
This primarily
comes-
relates to
Sure.
the analysis of the traffic stop data. So in our review of that data, what we found was that OPD collects relatively little information about traffic stops events that are taking place in the city. So specifically, there's little information about the context of the stop, so not much information, for example, about the reason for the stop, what citations specifically were issued during the stop, whether the stop took place perhaps during a special enforcement activity, things of that nature. And then specifically in the traffic stop data, there's no documentation about whether a search took place during a traffic stop and whether a seizure then resulted from the search, obviously, is also omitted. And obviously that's, these are very important constitutional issues regarding searches that take place during traffic stops. And so OPD would really benefit from revamping their traffic stops data system. There are vendors that have off-the-shelf offerings that are very highly customizable and very useful, which would allow OPD to have a better understanding about racial disparities that are taking place during traffic stop activity.
Thank you, that was what I was looking for. Now, did you all dig a little deeper and find out, because I'm concerned about this, where was those demographics, ethnicities, and zip codes? Were you able to find out if folks on 32805 are being pulled over more often for those that might have a tail light out than those that might be in Lake Nona or College Park or Baldwin Park? Do we have those facts and numbers to know if there's a disparity racially or economically or, I think Chief stated a fellow was in the medium with a shotgun and a 9mm, jumped in his car, and we were able, thank God, and thank you to those men or women that were able to de-escalate that without incident, versus if there was incident on the west side of Orlando with somebody with a shotgun or a 9mm that jumped in their car and it didn't de-escalate and something else happened. Are we able to know those? Because I think as these recommendations are put in place, we need to know where it's happening. I need real numbers and real factual numbers, because if it's not happening in certain zip codes, I don't need to focus my resources over in that area. I need to put the resources where some of these other things might be happening. And us to put policy, because that's what we're really searching for, is to find the data so that we can put great policy together. So did that happen?
Sure, yeah, Commissioner Hill, the data does not support that type of analysis at this time. We could not make that discernment based on the current data.
Now, you said there was no data, from what I understand, not real data. So you're saying the data that you had was, tell me how you got the data, I guess. That's the best question for me. When you say it didn't support, how did you retrieve the data? Because I keep hearing the same context of lack of data, lack of proper software, no tracking. So I'm a realist. I'm a straight shooter. So how did you gather that information to come up with your response just then?
Okay, again, I'm going to ask Zoe to talk about the problems, specific problems with the data, why we could not conduct these analyses, and then I'll ask Ben Horowitz to follow Zoe and talk about. Ben and Jeff looked at the system, the data systems, and I'll ask Ben to talk about the shortcomings and deficiencies within the data systems, why we are unable to conduct these kinds of analyses. So first Zoe again, and then Ben.
Thank you.
Sure. So in terms of how we got the data, we made a data request to OPD to provide us with the full set of all traffic stop activity that had occurred over a 5-year period. So they were able to return that to us. I believe that that is all actually housed in with the CAD RMS data in general in OPD, which is, I think, part of the reason for some of the deficiencies that Ben will discuss, is that it's not in a system that is specifically indicated for traffic stops. So when we say that there are gaps in the data, we're not saying that there are gaps in the sense that the data doesn't exist, but rather it's about the types of variables that are included in that data set. So they're just very sparse, very minimal information is collected about each individual traffic stop, which then hinders the ability to really do in-depth analysis, as Dr. Bowman was saying. And I'll go ahead and hand off to Ben to discuss a little bit more about the data systems themselves.
Thank you, Zoe, and thank you all for letting us present. As Zoe mentioned, the way OPD collects details on traffic stops is they simply add it to the disposition of a 911 call so that they can collect some information. And the way they end that call will indicate whether or not a citation or warning was issued, an arrest was taken, the race and gender of the driver. Sometimes they also collect the race and gender of the passengers if they had a substantial interaction with the officer. But because it's just kept in the CAD, the 911 system, and not a data system designed for this, it's not easy to distinguish between the various people in the vehicle, or whether the recorded disposition of an arrest or a warning or a citation was to the driver or to any of the passengers, or whether any other action occurred like we talked about with searches. And this is still only for traffic stops. Data on reasonable suspicion or consensual civilian encounters are only captured if they're part of an intelligence gathering effort. And so only very specific ones end up in a field investigative report, which is a paper form, then manually entered into a database for data entry. And so there's a lot of information that's not captured for reasonable suspicion, and then that's kept in a separate database than the limited information we have on traffic stops.
Thank you. What are some of your recommendations for that? Because I didn't see that truly captured there. Because as you know, as we talk about race and inclusion and equality within our ranks and our force, this is essential information that we don't have. Because in order to remedy a thing, you must know what you have to cure. So we know there's some things going on, I mean, throughout the nation, within our ranks. So I know our men and women in chief leads a fine organization, but we do want to be proactive, and if we don't have the matrix, we don't have the data, there's no way to follow the matrix. And this whole study, which is a great study with recommendations, if there's no numbers, right? Liars can figure, but the figures don't lie.
Right.
And so we can make a ton of recommendations, but if we don't have those numbers so that we can focus and pinpoint, I just think that, Mayor, as you said, these are first steps. I think that is the most important step, Chief, as we talk about moving forward, is to really put some type of database in place so that we can see what we need to do to move forward. And I'm trying to figure out, as you know, I was one of the first that I'm against defunding the police and still have that mindset. But I do think I would want to make sure that this council, as we reach our next budget session, that we put some resources in place in your budget so that we can modernize our technology, so that we can put some type of initiative together for data collection and assessment. I think that's number one. I prefer doing that before getting 15 more F-150s.
Yeah. Well, Commissioner, one of my biggest takeaways from this report is the data collection portion of it. This will be the game changer, not only for the Orlando Police Department, but agencies across the state, across this nation. If we don't have the right information that we can then compare, for example, some of our neighborhoods where we see the most police activity is where we receive the bulk of our calls for service, meaning officers are drawn to those areas more frequently than other areas. But the bottom line is we're still lacking a lot of information that will allow us to then see if there's a correlation between certain activities, traffic stops, arrests, and what have you, to determine whether it's being done in equity across the city versus some neighborhoods being more prone to be affected by certain activities than others. But the reasons why, that's the problem right now. We don't have the ability to, we don't have enough data to say this is the reason why definitively, right? So I think, to your point though, as we continue to move forward, again, is going to be a heavy lifting. It's going to be almost a mountain, like moving a mountain. That's how much work it'll take to get our data collection process in place. But as long as we have the resources, as long as we have the commitment to make sure that we do this in the near future, then I think you will start seeing those results, especially with the dashboards, as we make those dashboards available to everyone.
And, you know, it shows also sometimes who's doing the most, as the kids would say, meaning making more stops, frivolous stops than others, arresting people without just cause, you know, so it'll kind of pinpoint certain individuals that might be bad players. Also, when you're collecting this data, and great cops that are doing the right thing, and you just can say, hey, this is one of our superheroes, because you can actually see it versus just speak about it, and, you know, it's paper, this paper stuff is antiquated.
Commissioner Hill, to your point that you didn't see at this 30 and 50,000 level, there's a very robust discussion on this particular point in the final report. You'll find it there.
Okay, thank you. You know, I think that was my takeaway, is we have to put some matrices and some data collecting in place. Did not know we didn't have that, but this, like as you said, it's going to help us become a better city and a better department. And I guess we'll continue to talk about policy. I would like, Chief, though, if possible, as we move forward, and I know the men and women with your community patrol team, and I work with many of them, are doing some great work in the community. But what I do see is them working in silos. I even had a back-to-school event a couple weeks ago, and I was in an apartment complex serving 300 kids and didn't know my neighborhood patrol officers was around the corner serving other kids. It just would have been great if we had communication and we were doing it together. So I do appreciate working with, you're going to be working with what you've always done, and the men and women with our family parks and rec, you know, that has a passion. We have our my brother's keeper, and the kid zones, and so many other different areas that I know that you all support. But as you're moving forward with your neighborhood patrol and community outreach, which I think you're doing a great job, as they stated in the social media, that we continue to work as a unit, and as a city entity and a big picture versus us all doing one-offers. So I do think, as you sit with FPR, that you kind of sit with the commissioners. You have one of your outreach specialists work with us to know what we're also doing in the community, so we can collaborate and do it together. And with that, that's all I have, Mayor.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Stewart.
Thank you, Mayor. I know we're going a long time. It's going to be a long day for us up here on the council. So I've got probably 15, 20 questions I'd like to kind of cover with you. But we'll do that separately, Chief, if you don't mind, if that's okay. Two things that come to mind that I think probably give me a pause. One is, can you help define a guardian-style policing? I know that's probably, I'm getting ready to have you embark on probably a 2 or 3 hour conversation. But tell me how guardian-style policing differs from other types and what are the evidences of its success? Sure,
Commissioner, we talked today about guardian style versus warrior style policing, and the emphasis on guardian style policing really started to come about in the President's 21st Century Task Force Policing Report. A guardian style police department or policing actually seeks to work conjointly with the community. We use the word co-producer, to be co-producers or collaborators in safety, that they will reach out to the community and ask community for input, feedback. They'll seek community support, community guidance in establishing their priorities for policing. In fact, their priorities for policing are aligned with community needs, community feedback, community input. A warrior style department, on the other hand, is an outshoot of the 30s to the 50s. It's a very traditional, very action oriented policing, should I say, very aggressive policing. Warrior style police really seek to enforce as the first priority. They seek to make arrests. They measure their successes typically based on numbers of arrests, numbers of tickets. They base their success based on quantity of activity typically versus desirable outcomes. And so starting with this movement to 21st century policing, there has been a shift in what we're hearing from communities, as well as advice and recommendations in best practices, advocating that police departments do look less militaristic, that they go away from the military style academies where recruits in the academies are treated more like they're in boot camp, military boot camp, than they are in a collegial environment, and that kind of more collegiate academy training is transferred over and translated into how the officers are expected to treat individuals out in the street as well. So when we talk about the guardian type of policing, we look for departments to embrace 4 core principles: community policing, procedural justice, de-escalation, and bias-free policing. And those are really tenets of this guardian style of policing.
Commissioner, if I could add, you know, the guardian way of doing business is something that we preach to our officers, especially when they first start in their careers. But we also remind them that they must also have that warrior mentality, so that when you have that active shooter, when you have that situation that basically most people can't even fathom the idea of responding to or addressing, that they have the courage, that they have the will to be able to put fear aside and challenge that situation and take care of what's needed to potentially save others or their fellow officers in the process. So it's a fine line that they must walk, but the guardian way of doing business is what we should all embrace, but for us to ever forget that warrior in you has to be present at times, and you must always keep that in check also. So
yeah, and I must say that guardian and warrior are not mutually exclusive. There are aspects of the guardian style of policing that implicates that an officer can turn the switch on and turn it off. The switch is typically off until he or she turns it on. the switch to aggressive policing. The warrior style of policing, in that style, the aggressive switch is typically on, and they turn it off to do less aggressive policing. So we're advocating the guardian style where that switch is off, where they switch to the more aggressive style when needed, but it's based on the situation, and it's not the overwhelming philosophy and approach to policing the community.
I appreciate it. I had a feeling that the same way that you're identifying, and I've always felt like our police force is a strong guardian style that has a warrior, a little bit of a warrior mentality. I think the challenge comes in the recruitment side, because when you recruit out of the military, you tend to bring in somebody who starts as a warrior, and you have to convert them someplace else. And so that goes back to the racial bias and other things that are all kind of interconnected. Let me say thank you to the work that you've done. This is incredible work, and thank you, Chief, for your willingness to participate in this to make it happen. One other quick question, and I promise I'll shut up and share my other stuff with you privately. One of the challenges that we have, I think, in the police force is a traffic stop and what goes on at a traffic stop, and the instant challenge that could occur immediately at a traffic stop. Things escalate and de-escalate very quickly at a traffic stop, because basically an officer is stopping at a particular point for a variety of reasons, but doesn't know what else is going on. You mentioned the Calpost 8-step model that you would recommend. Again, tell me a little bit about that, and then I'll shut up and let you, we can keep going.
Okay, I'll ask Bill Murphy, our Calpost expert, to talk about that 8-step model. Bill?
Yeah, that's taught to the 41 academies in the state. It's just a way to do a traffic stop. When I looked at OPD, the way that they do it, they do very good tactics on it. They drill on the tactics. It's real good. They do introduce themselves to it. What they were lacking, though, quite frankly, is the procedural justice, the lead components of it. That's giving voice, being respectful. They are courteous in the way that they talk to it. But when I went over with their academy director, I said, look, you got to, the reason it's 8-step, there are 8 steps. You introduce yourself. I'm Officer Bill Murphy from the Los Angeles Police Department. The reason I pulled you over is because I saw you run the red light at 5th and Main. Is there any reason why you have run that red light? And you stop and you listen. So it builds into those 8 steps, actually procedural justice, and lead into it. In addition, what I would recommend is that you take that curriculum, the procedural justice, the voice, the respect, neutrality, transparency. Lead is listen, explain, dignity, equity, and dignity, and teach those concepts in it. That's what they were lacking. They're very good on the tactics. I mean, they did talk courtesy, but it's not comprehensive, and you should drill that from the academy right into your orientation program, right into your FTO program, and into in-service. So when I explained to them, it's they just need a little bit more work and actually build that procedural justice in is what they needed.
Thank you very much. I think that's one of the areas that we have, I think, the greatest concern about, because if a vehicle's pulled over, you walk up and literally to a place where a police officer runs the risk of a violent confrontation that escalates very quickly.
And as we speak, Daytona is doing the funeral service for an officer who was shot and ultimately died as a result of a wound he received during a vehicle stop. But there is always a better way to communicate with people, and I think through these observations and through the recommendations, we can always re-emphasize to our officers that just taking a few extra seconds, a few extra minutes to explain the situation within reason, we can accomplish that, and that's an area that we can improve upon.
Well, I appreciate it. Let me just say thank you to everybody involved again, and thank you to the men and women of the Orlando Police Department. Their involvement, their encouragement is, I think, puts us in a position to really again be a leader in the country and a leader here locally. Chief, I think you may minimize some of this, but I think you've mentioned that a lot of what we do here, will actually be translated into other local agencies especially, and maybe within the state. And we can see a real change in how we do policing because we have done it in a better way. So I'm grateful for that and grateful to the men and women of our own police department. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Sheehan.
Thank you, Mayor. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Bowman and the Bowman Group. I just had a couple of statements and a couple questions. I think this review process, Chief Erlone, really shows a willingness to evolve, and I certainly appreciate that. Something that I've heard from members of the Citizens Police Review Board who have served is that they feel frustrated that they're more of a rubber stamp and less of a forum. So I think that is a very appropriate thing to look at in terms of how we can involve the community more in the Community Police Review Board, because it's perceived as a rubber stamp right now. Something else I think that I want to also add that Commissioner Hill said is that we must collect that data, and I think that officers have computers in their patrol cars. I think it would be a matter of maybe adding spheres of data that they can fill in, so it would be easier to collect that data. I might add a little bit more work to the officer, but then it would be easier to go back and actually collect the data. So that might be something to look at in how the officers' reports are set up, so that then that data can be queried in terms of what you're looking for in terms of stop and search and different things like that. Something else that I think that I would like to follow up that Commissioner Burns brought up is on doing an evaluation. I think something else that we need to be aware of in hiring officers is on domestic violence, and unfortunately now domestic terrorism that needs to be addressed in psych testing and evaluation. So those are the concerns that I had. I want to thank everyone for all the hard work that they've done. And I think it's important to realize that while we have a good department, we do want to be a great department. And I really appreciate it. And I hope that OPD is not going to get attacked for trying to be transparent and trying to do better. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Ortiz.
Thank you, Mayor. There's an old Mexican proverb that says everyone makes firewood of a fallen tree. And because of the actions of a few around the nation, every police department has been under scrutiny. And that's pretty sad, because we do have a lot of angels working for our communities out there trying to do the best they can. I'm just going to make a couple of suggestions, and I was going to ask Dr. Bowman and Chief Womack, thank you for those reports, for your report. Chief, I can't say enough and commend you enough for what you're trying to do here and exposing yourself so people understand that we're transparent, that definitely deserves a great commendation. What you're doing is amazing. One of the questions I was going to ask, have we talked to the Criminal Justice Standards and Training Commission about all this to standardize this all across the board?
Commissioner, from our perspective, we did not and we have not. We believe that it's the city and the police department's position to talk more broadly on the state level about the kinds of state-related changes that they believe are proper. We did not address that.
I had the honor of preceding the Florida League of Cities this past year, and our agenda, our initiative was about empowering people around the state about how to negotiate, how to work with the legislature. There's a huge deal of lack of knowledge. Okay, let me use my words correctly. Lack of knowledge on how to engage legislature and government as a whole. You ask questions to some of our residents about any particular legislation that just passed, and very few people know. And I think that's the same deal with law enforcement. I think there's a huge lack of understanding of how law enforcement works and what's expected of law enforcement. And I think one of the issues that we have is that we have not empowered our community with enough knowledge. And I think we need to train more. For example, us as commissioners, we should go through the academy, through Citizens Police Academy, to understand how law enforcement works, and to see if there's some things that need to be tweaked. But for us to be guiding and leading, we should know what we're dealing with. It's just like a defense attorney. When they're defending their clients, they need to know both sides of the fence, what's going on. And the same thing goes with the Citizens Police Academy, the Citizens Police Review Board. I think we should expose each and every one of them to a Citizens Police Academy and to a simulator also, to have an idea of what a law enforcement officer has to go through. I believe all these engagements that we're trying to get law enforcement to do in terms of our community with Department of Family, Parks and Recreation is amazing. I think we've been doing that for a long time, but there's all other challenges. There's a lack of personnel, there's shifts, there's all kinds of things that we have to address. And it's hard to accomplish everything at the same time with the resources we have at any given time. I think we do pretty good, and I know that we accept criticism in a remarkable way, and we adapt new policies to help. But I also think we have to, as we address these issues about law enforcement, let's also tell them the good things they're doing, and let's also get the community engaged on empowering them with knowledge for them to help our law enforcement to do better. Because the safety of our community is not just the job of law enforcement, it's everybody's job. And I think as we address law enforcement issues, our police department issues today, we should also say a few of the good things that they have done, the great things that they have done. I happen to have the honor and the privilege of working with the Orlando Police Department for 14 years, and I know a lot of great things were done working with the community. As the chief said, we used to work out of the Englewood Community Center, and just like that, other officers used to engage with others in other centers. And there's kids out there that could tell you that their path in life changed because of the intervention of a police officer, and that's good. That's good stuff that we need to continue bringing up to date. As we address the issues that we're doing wrong, of course, is an evolution. We need to address those issues that are not going well. But let's not just talk about the bad things too. Let's also encourage our law enforcement officers to do better and pat them in the back when they do good things, because we don't want their morale to be down, as I feel it is right now. It's pretty down because it seems like everybody is kicking them in the hiney. And I get it. There's a lot of issues we have to address. But let's also help them feel empowered in the sense of wanting to continue working with the community, because there's a lot of good angels that we have surrounding us, and they're the ones that, as Jack Nicholson said in that movie, A Few Good Men, they're the ones watching while we're asleep. So let's go ahead and continue working together. Once again, I commend the great work that you guys have done, and I just wish that we also empower our commission in terms of knowing exactly all the things that law enforcement do, and also our Citizens Review Board. So thank you.
Yeah, Commissioner, thank you for those comments. And let me just add to what you said. Part of our report, and I know that you've not had an opportunity to review our report in its entirety, all 207 pages and appendices, but part of our report talks about the Public Information Office and opportunities to tell the story of the OPD. We agree, there are some incredible things that are happening, but the community doesn't know about a lot of them. And so we're advocating as one of our recommendations to really focus on that Public Information Office and tell the story and push it out just as you're indicating.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you.
Commissioner Hill.
Promise this is my last comment. This initiative came about not because we have a corrupt police department. We have a top-notch Orlando Police Department. Or was there real cracks? We didn't come about this initiative because of our officers. It came about because we wanted to see the racial disparities within the department. So I want to know, because I haven't seen it in the report. You didn't address race in this report. Is there somewhere in your final report, I know we'll eventually read it, we got it, but is there any solutions or findings related to the interactions and the things that go on within Orlando Police Department related to African Americans and Hispanics? Because that's really why we brought you to the city. It wasn't to tell us what great jobs or what we're not doing well. It was really to address if there was a gap between community policing with race and race equity. And I want to know, is that in here? And if so, what did you find and how do we move forward?
Commissioner Hill, you will find some information in there related to race, especially regarding traffic stops, regarding community policing and community engagement and interaction. But the problem that we had was the data. The data would not allow us to make strong conclusions or recommendations. And in assessing the data, we base our assessment and our recommendations on objective information contained within the data. Now, we have a set of, we talk to many community members, and we have community members' observations as part of what we've included, and we have some additional information that's not yet a part of the report. But the biggest problem with drawing race-related conclusions is the data just does not support an objective conclusion. And it would be unfair to the OPD for us to say you're doing this when we cannot substantiate it with the data. Ordinarily, our reports, our work would focus exactly as you're saying, but the reason we made data our number one recommendation is because we got into it and we cannot make a number of those recommendations because of the shortcomings of the data.
What's your recommendations? Not relate to race, but we got to do something immediately, it seems as if, Chief. Because it's great that we paid this $800,000 to analyze OPD, but we really didn't get what we were looking for, I truly believe.
Well, I think, to be honest with you, Commissioner, I think it has exceeded all expectations. And
To put a greater community plan together, but this is not what we were looking for. We were looking how to address race equity.
Correct.
And what was going on within the department. And
yes, ma'am. So I'll go back to maybe.
how can we fix it, Chief?
Ma'am?
I know the date, I know we have to get this collection, but we need immediate results because the final outcome, we're still not able to implement what we were able to come. As a whole for the department, this is great. But when we start talking about race and equity and inclusion, we're not there.
So, Commissioner, this is a personal statement. As a 44-year resident of this great community, as a 29-year member of this agency, if I felt that in the Orlando Police Department there was systemic racism, I would not be the chief of police today. If I felt that the overall performance of the work of the law enforcement profession as a whole had systemic racism, I wouldn't be a member of this profession. I think in part we have been, I don't think there's any other profession in the world who is put into the same bucket when something happens within the profession. And I think in part that is something the society as a whole has adopted, that whenever something happens, they group all the agencies together. And I think as society, we have a responsibility to judge our police departments, the members of the law enforcement profession, by jurisdiction with the work that they're doing and hold them accountable when they have done wrong. We have room to improve when it comes to our overall performance of our services. But to your point, are we broken? Absolutely
No,
not.
I didn't say that.
No, that's what I mean. You said it.
I said we need access to data in some type of, because I am in strong support of you and the men and women.
So with that
Chief.
said, ma'am.
But I can't go with feelings.
No, with
Your
that,
feelings.
correct.
I paid $800,000 for
Yeah.
facts and numbers.
But I think that's the path that this has yielded, that we did not have the right data collection in order to answer those questions that we, as leaders of this profession, also want to know, that every member of our community also wants to have the answer. But on a personal note, again, based on my experience, I don't think that, are there individuals in this profession, even our department, who maybe don't belong? Absolutely. Chief Rooney said it best. We come from the human race. Unfortunately, the human race is not perfect. Our job is to make sure that we identify those situations when we have the ability to pluck those individuals and pull them away from our profession. But the overall work of the men and women that is being done is noble and is just. We just need to make sure that we address those instances that we know exist where someone has operated outside the line.
And I'm going to end with this. I just don't want it to be said that me, Regina Hill, Commissioner Hill, is saying that there's problems. I didn't say that, and I'm not, characterizing that. And Chief, I can tell you this, me personally, if I thought there was things just out of the abnormal, I wouldn't support you either. So you wouldn't have to worry about that. But I know that you are a great chief, and we have a great force. What I was stating is that, matter of fact, we asked for a study, got some great information and takeaways. We found a few gaps, what we're going to close. I'm seeing this data and collection piece for all of us when we're trying to put a budget together and say where resources need to go. When I'm speaking to the community on September, when I vote for the largest budget that OPD deserves and need to keep our community safe, I need numbers to say, hey, this is why. So the numbers, I'm not talking about the work. We do great work, but we have to figure out, and if I would have known this, that we were lacking with technology and data and all those things, I would have been advocated for you, for us to be able to find resources, Chris, so that we can do a better job, right, when it comes to this. This has nothing to do with policing, what I'm talking about, so I don't want that to be misconstrued. I'm talking about information. As we start talking about the city of Orlando becoming future ready on all aspects, and that's from sustainability, that's from affordable housing, job opportunities. It's also making sure that our men and women have a system in place so they won't have to be questioned about their integrity and all those type of things. Because we can go to the dashboard, Chief, and say, no, our men and women are doing a great job, and you can go, that's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about the work and the nobility and the efforts of our men and women, which I dearly appreciate, especially in these such times such as this. I'm just saying, I really was looking for greater numbers that was focused on what we planned, and that was African Americans and Hispanics in the inner city of community policing, right? And that's where I'm coming. That's not here, and that's fine. That's fine, because we don't have the data, and I appreciate us not going off feelings and emotions, but the numbers don't. So I'm asking, what are the solutions? I know you said we need to update that. Is there a cost associated with it, so we'll know what we need to put together to give Chief what he needs, so that we truly can be not just a 21st century police organization with community outreach, but when it comes to technology?
Yeah, Commissioner, thank you again, and I very much appreciate your comments. I can tell you our recommendations, if implemented, will result in a department that's fair and equitable. It'll result in a department that treats people, regardless of their race or ethnicity or their gender or any other personal characteristics. It will treat them fair. It will treat them with dignity and respect. It will result in a police department that's transparent, that's open and engaging to community input and community involvement, and that seeks that. And so while we can't tell you that 5% or 10% of the traffic stops or the interactions with citizens involve a race component. What we have said in our report is that given these recommendations, if implemented, it's going to result in the kind of police department that, that brings trust, that citizens believe is credible, and that serves the entire community regardless of where they live and regardless of their personal characteristics.
Thank you.
Thank you. A lot of great information, a lot of great work done over the last year. Now, Chief, we need to implement. Thank you for your presentation. Without objection, we'll stand adjourned in the workshop.